Today on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, we will discuss the Linval Joseph signing. We'll discuss what effect his presence has on the DL depth chart. We also have some notes from the last Oxnard padded practice, some notes on the fire that happened, and more on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. I am your host, Landon McCool. I'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you can get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Coming up on today's show, after the Linval Joseph signing, it feels like the defensive line pieces have started to fall into place. So I will make an early prediction of the 10 defensive linemen I think will serve as the core of that unit on Sundays this season. I'll go over practice notes from what sounded like a very spirited practice. Things seem to be getting hot and heavy, maybe not hot and heavy as the fire that happened the night before. We'll discuss that as well. But first up, the Cowboys signed an enormous free agent, literally. Linval Joseph has signed into the Dallas Cowboys on a 1-year, $2.5 million deal, which can go up to $4 million. This is the big body nose tackle that a lot of us have been waiting for. I think, Jordan Phillips signing kind of made us kind of whetted our appetite for those big bodies. A lot of people thought, oh, maybe this is the nose tackle backup rotational guy that could work with Mozzie that the Cowboys were looking for. Turns out Phillips is more of a 3 technique. He does like to kind of line up in that B gap and get upfield. He even talked about that in an interview with the press, with his first interview with the press. With the Dallas media. So the Cowboys still felt like they needed to go out and get one more body. And what did they do? They went out and got Linval Joseph. Now, this situation is a little bit unique, right? Linval Joseph, obviously, a long storied career, was drafted by the Giants. Cowboys fans maybe remember him from way back when. He spent a good 4 years with the Giants before ended up signing a deal with Minnesota and spent almost the entirety of Mike Zimmer's tenure as head coach in Minnesota with Mike Zimmer. I think he left. Joseph left 2 years right before Zimmer got fired. So spent at least a good 5 good seasons underneath Zimmer, learning and operating in this system, which obviously has a lot of familiarity for him. He is going to be 36 years old in October, which, when you're talking about these big body guys, you worry about exactly how much durability they have. And Linval has had some up and down stuff. He's had a shoulder, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. But there is something to note here. I mean, he's, one of these bigger guys, 330 pounds plus. He's 36 years old. So durability, I think, could be an issue. And I think that there's something else worth mentioning here. I don't know that he's going to be doing more than just being kind of a rotational backup. I think he'll likely have to share this role with Justin Rogers. I mean, look at the snap count that he has for the last 2 years. He basically signed. These snap counts are all per PFF. Thank you very much, PFF. These snap counts are indicating that basically he signed, with Buffalo and with Philadelphia the last 2 seasons, waiting until November to sign with the team. So this is a little bit intriguing to me because it makes me wonder whether or not he's signing with us for a specific reason to early. That, like, why is he not kind of doing his normal situation of trying to find a job in November? Why is he already trying to get work before the regular season? What's the change there, right? Is it Paul Gunther? Is his influence trying to get him into the roster a little bit early? Or was it based on the fact that he didn't get a lot of phone calls in August of last year and that he was having to wait until November before he was having to sign a contract? So it is kind of interesting to see, how different this signing is compared to his last 2 signings. Does he have enough to kind of make it through a whole season? And I think the snap counts that I just showed you, it portends a guy that is likely going to need to be sharing even a backup role likely with another guy. And that's why I think Justin Rogers makes a lot of sense, because they liked what they've seen from him. He's another nose tackle guy. And I think that, if you were able to kind of cobble together the youth and enthusiasm of Justin Rogers with some of the veteran presence with Joseph, then you're likely to kind of get a lot of what you're looking for out of Joseph by himself, right? I just think that at the age of 36, he hasn't played, as we showed, more than 200 snaps in the last 2 years. So I just think that it's one of those situations where they're getting more talent here. He's not going to be someone who's going to take a lion's share of these snaps or be a starter or anything, but he's going to be a guy who can be part of a rotation, a healthy rotation, I think, at this point, that can give you good snaps as a nose tackle, specifically on early downs in the middle of that defense, to kind of just shore things up, to help them earn the right to rush the passer. You got to stop the run to have some fun, as Carl Lawson said the other day in practice. So I think this is a smart move. I mean, it's not surprising. Jerry has been speaking the last few days that they were talking about adding another face. I think this was probably the worst kept secret at Oxnard, is that Linval Joseph was likely to be coming back. So here we are with it. I think the only thing that's surprising about it is it happened before the regular season, and that he's kind of committed to playing to early part in the season, which is obviously a big change from what we've seen from him these last few years. Okay, so obviously the signing had a huge effect on the defensive line situation, but honestly, for me, I feel like it really crystallized the whole thing. I think we've got a clear, solid 10 players that are going to be the core of this group, and we will talk about those folks next. Folks, I love going to live events, concerts, comedy, and obviously sporting events. I talked about last year going to the Cowboys-Chargers game early last season, and how fun it was to experience football in Los Angeles, and getting out and walking out in the crowd and doing some pre-gaming. It's always so much fun. Really, the only reason I don't get out to more events is that it can be prohibitively expensive. But with Gametime, that isn't the case anymore. They have great ways to save you money, including the Gametime Picks feature, which filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. I started early shopping for potential Cowboys game tickets, and some of the regular season tickets I saw were under $40. So with their lowest price guarantee, you'll always be getting a great price, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today, and last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Thank you for making the Locked On Cowboys podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, make sure you enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, we talked about the Linval Joseph signing and how it was needed for this team. Let's talk about where this team is at the defensive line position, because I do feel like the addition of Joseph kind of, had a lot of these pieces fall into place. I think at this point now you can make an argument that there are 10 guys on this defensive line roster that are going to be, obviously make the team. Well, not all of these guys are obvious to make the team, but I think should make the team and should be the core of this defensive line as we start to play on Sundays. In my opinion, the 5 defensive ends are obviously Micah, Tank, Carl Lawson, Golson, and Marshawn Nealon, right? And the 5 defensive tackles are Mozzie, Osia Odigizua, Joseph, Phillips, and Rogers. Justin Rogers, the rookie from Auburn that they drafted in the 7th round. So I think if you look at these groups, right, you get a great kind of combination of guys that are sort of specialists at their individual positions, and then guys who you can kind of move around and do a bunch of different stuff. We're just going to go through these real quick, and we'll talk about the potential roles if we had, right? Tank, right? Obviously, he is your left defensive end. He's a pass rusher. He can reduce down inside and play some 3 technique if you want, and some NASCAR packages. We've seen him do that. So we've seen DeMarcus Lawrence. He's had, kind of career years these last few years being healthy. We know what DeMarcus Lawrence is and what his role is. I don't know that it's actually going to change too much in this Mike Zimmer defense. Micah is obviously a little bit interesting. It's funny. We have not talked a lot about Micah Parsons on this show during training camp. He's had an incredible training camp, and I think that that's partially why. It's the Dez Bryant thing. If those of you have been following and listening to me for a long time, you've heard me talk about way back when, that it became difficult to talk about Dez Bryant during training camp practices because he just dominates every single day, and it becomes routine, right? And that's where Micah Parsons is a little bit in training camp at this point. He's just, oh yeah, there goes Micah, and he could ruin every snap if he wanted to, but he doesn't. So obviously Micah's role on this defense is probably going to change a little bit. I think he might be playing just a tick more of kind of off-ball linebacker, but that doesn't mean he won't be moving forward or going after the quarterback any less. I just think that they're going to be moving where he's coming from in a bunch of different spots. He will definitely play some traditional off-ball linebacker. He did that last year. But I think, there will be a slight tweak on where Micah's role is, where he will be lining up. And I think that that's what kind of was a way to also make sure that they were getting Sam Williams lots of opportunities to get onto the field and play as that kind of true defensive end while Micah is moving around. Obviously, unfortunately, Sam got hurt. And so now that kind of falls onto the shoulders of Carl Lawson and Marshawn Kneeland. I should go the other way. It's probably Marshawn Kneeland and Carl Lawson to kind of figure out that right defensive end in the base package situation when Micah is playing linebacker. But I think this kind of gives us a good opportunity to talk about Lawson. I think Lawson is a guy that, he's in his career, he's played all up and down the line of scrimmage. And so I think he'll likely be the right defensive end in base situations when they don't have Mike out there. I think, Kneeland obviously and him will kind of rotate that backup role. I think Lawson, if you needed him to, could be a stand-up pass rusher. He could play some Sam if you needed him to. But I think likely his main role will be to be a defensive end on both sides, kind of just part of that rotation. Marshawn Kneeland, is going to have a huge role. He's another guy, obviously, who's had a really great camp. You've heard us talk about that. He is going to have a big role in the regular season. He will probably be the first pass rusher off the bench when one of the Tank or Micah needs a rest. Maybe not early on. Maybe Lawson takes that role early on. But I do think that, as the season goes on, Kneeland is going to be someone that they're going to put on the field because he's just been too good not to. I also view Kneeland as a guy who potentially could reduce down inside, be a 3 technique. We've seen it in some of these preseason camps, much like Tank, where he can go down and play in the B gap if you need him to, and some of these NASCAR packages. So I certainly look forward to a potential NASCAR package where you might have Tank and Kneeland as the 2 inside guys, and then some Lawson and Micah Parsons on the outside, or however you want to do that. I do think that there are some really cool combinations that you can work out there. Speaking of cool combinations, the other guy that we kind of haven't mentioned here is Golson, right? And I think that his role, I talked about it, I think it was a little bit yesterday, where his role is best as the kind of tweener guy that kind of could be used here and there. It could be used as a defensive end on certain formations, could be used reduced as a 3 technique in the B gap if you needed to. I think he could play head up on the tackle in certain packages. I think the key thing is to not have to rely on him to be a true member of this depth chart, right? Like I don't think you want him to be the starter if someone got hurt, because I think the value in Golson is in moving him around, is in having him play 4 snaps at defensive end and the 3 snaps at defensive tackle. So obviously he can do that, and we'll have to do that if it plays that way in a game. But I think the preference there is probably to have other people as full-time starters when they need them, and to try to keep Golson as kind of a movable chess piece on this defensive line. And then on the defensive tackle side, I think it kind of breaks down into, three categories, which is not surprising. It's the pure three techniques, the guys that are just three techniques. And really, honestly, I think the only one of these guys that is truly only a three technique is Osa Odigizua, right? You've got a couple of guys that can do both, that can play one and the three. I think that Mozzie, obviously Phillips also fit into this. Joseph is probably more of the third category, which is just pure nose tackles. I think obviously Rodgers falls into that. So now what you do is you've got five of these guys, all that have kind of differing skill sets. Some of them could be nose tackles. Some of them could be only three techs. Some of them can be both. And I think that between all those guys and between Golson, you're able to kind of very easily fill all the needs you're going to have for a defense that is going to be doing some interesting lineups and going to be doing some interesting formations. And so I am excited to kind of see exactly how all these guys will get deployed. But I do think that it's very clear that those 10 guys, when put onto the active roster, could assemble a core that could be very flexible, could line up in a whole bunch of different ways, and then provide coverage and backup for anyone on any injury of any of those guys. Real quick, I do want to throw out a reminder about Denzel Daxon. Denzel Daxon is on the International Player Pathway Program, so that means he gets an exemption currently in training camp. But also, if he gets cut and he makes it through waiver wires and the Cowboys are able to revert him to their practice squad, he gets an exemption there too. So he won't count towards the rest of your practice squad count, and you could still call him up 3 times to your active roster without losing him from your practice squad. So you basically get a free spot with Daxon, much like we saw previously with the players that have come in and been on that exemption before. It's just a roster mechanism in order to give you the opportunity to have a little bit extra time and not have the worry of being on the same track as these guys who have been playing football the entirety of their life. All right, coming up, we are going to get into some of the practice notes on what, like I said, sounded like a very spirited practice at Oxnard. We'll get into that next. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game, all of them. You can have access to the whole kit and caboodle, and all you need is a Google account, a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And guys, like I just checked on the FanDuel site, and the Cowboys are currently plus 1,800 to win the Super Bowl. I'm just saying it's $5. So if you just want to throw $5 down on the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl, you get your 3 free weeks of YouTube TV Sunday Ticket. It's a win-win for all parties involved as far as I'm concerned. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day on tomorrow's podcast, I will be breaking down this weekend's third and final preseason game with the Dallas Cowboys against the Los Angeles Chargers that is scheduled to take place in Dallas. So definitely make sure you tune in for that. All right. First things first, in regards to the Cowboys practice notes, we got to talk about the fire. It was a very small fire in one of the unoccupied rooms that the Cowboys had, I think, sectioned off for them in the River Ridge complex in which they were staying. It doesn't sound like anybody was hurt. It sounds like there was some damage to the property, but I don't know if there was any damage to any personal belongings or anything. They're being a little bit tight-lipped about it, but it's something that happened. It's something that the Cowboys were obviously got through and no one was hurt. But it is a little bit scary that happened while the players were kind of all in the complex. And I don't know if it, the literal fire lit a figurative fire underneath the Cowboys, but it sounded like it was a very spirited practice. And I say sounds like because a good portion of the practice was under media blackout by the Cowboys. So a lot of these notes that I'm going to be talking about are based off of beat writers who were there. I guess we should talk about some of the aspects of like why they were shutting this off. Were they doing some work on the Browns? Are they protecting some trade secrets on something that they're trying to install? It sounded like it was pretty normal kind of competition team stuff, but it is worth noting, and I think it's interesting that the Cowboys on their last padded practice decided to kind of shut off that valve of media information to the rest of us. Here's some notes that we kind of heard in there, and we're just going to comment on real quick. Trayvon Diggs seems to be rounding into shape. It sounded like all day yesterday during camp, Trayvon was talking trash to everybody and backing it up and playing very good football throughout the practice. It's just great to see him kind of rounding back into shape. I'm just excited to see him, get his legs out underneath him and being out on the field. It's just, we've missed him. And it seems like he's moving well. He's taking to the recovery well. The Cowboys clearly had a very good plan for kind of making sure that he came back slowly and wasn't trying to rush back. And, with the obviously risk of re-injury, you just got to be really smart there. And, for the most part, the Cowboys seemingly have done that. And, look, he's missed, the 90%, 85% of training camp at this point. But I think we all know who Trayvon Diggs is. I think the fact that he took a year off, came right back into practice and started dominating kind of shows you who he is as well. So I don't have any concerns at this point. It sounds like he's right on schedule for coming back and playing. So I'm certainly excited to see him in week 1 against the Browns. Carl Lawson caused a pressure on Dak that led to a hurried throw, which turned into a tip interception for Hooker. Again, great to see Carl Lawson getting out there and immediately making his presence felt. I really do think that if he's healthy, this could be a really huge addition for the Cowboys. I think he's motivated. He's incredibly technically refined. And if he's got, his legs underneath him and he's got the opportunity to kind of get a breather and be part of a rotation, I think Carl Lawson is a guy that could be ready to really be a big contributor for this team. Tyler Guyton gave everyone a nice little scare. He walked to the training room with some minor knee soreness, but it does sound like it's just minor preventative stuff, very similar to what Brandon Cooks was dealing with. Just kind of, hey, my knee feels sore. Let's not push it, right? And just go talk to the trainers, see how they want to handle this. So good news, but obviously something to keep an eye on. Izzy Mukuamu seemed to have a lot of success in the one-on-ones from what was reported. Apparently he had a very heated I think as 4 reps, up to 4 reps versus Uncle Baby Billy Johnson. And the first rep, it sounded like Johnson got the best of him and kind of lorded over him a little bit and started talking trash. And then the next 3 reps, Mukuamu won and was just talking mad trash. So I'm obviously a big fan of Mukuamu. I think he's making this team just because I think he's such a matchup weapon. He can obviously play the outside corner. He was playing outside corner against Uncle Baby Billy Johnson when he knocked those passes away. He's played a ton of nickel throughout this camp. That's basically what his position is. So I think there's a very good chance that Mukuamu makes this team and is going to be that backup nickel that the Cowboys have been kind of trying to figure out this camp. Jalen Brooks, another guy who's showing some dog, right? He was really fired up on a couple reps, had dealt with some of that trash talk that we talked about that Trayvon Diggs was kind of dishing out. And he returned the favor on it. And that had been thrown his way by guys like Trayvon Diggs. He had a nice driving catch. He had a touchdown catch. Just a guy that, again, a lot like Jalen Tolbert last year has just kept on ascending. Again, just like we talk about the drumbeat on this show a lot. Shout out to Sigmund Bloom. And I think that is this Brooks has never stopped drumming. He's like Keith Moon over here. It's just like every single practice, Brooks and Tolbert are making it happen. And considering the fact that they haven't had CeeDee Lamb and Cooks on this field, the fact that the offense has been able to move the ball with Brooks and Tolbert, I think shows you where they are with these guys. So I'm excited for Jalen Brooks. I mean, I think not only is he obviously going to make the team, but I think he's actually going to have a role on Sundays as well. He's going to get some snaps. So I'm excited to see that. I think just reading tea leaves here, it feels like there could be a chance that John Stevens Jr. takes that tight end 2 spot. I've heard a couple of different folks kind of mention it. And I don't think it's necessarily because Scooney has been bad or anything. I think it's just been John Stephens Jr. has been very good. Scooney has not necessarily done anything to stand out. And I think that's more the issue more than anything. He's done some good stuff blocking from what I've seen. He's he's catching the ball for the most part, but he just hasn't made big plays or anything like that. And obviously John Stephens Jr. is like a matchup, weapon. And if he can learn to block even, 60% of what Scooney can, it's going to be hard to keep John Stephens Jr. off the field because he is going to be such a weapon, especially in the red zone. We mentioned that it was a hot one out of practice and not necessarily the temperature, because fights broke out at several points, and at least one between Fergie and Wilson. Things got feisty. Apparently, Wilson took exception to the veracity, I guess we'll say, of Fergie's stiff arm. These guys are tired. They're at the end of this camp. They're ready to go home. And this is just going to happen. If anything, I think it shows that it's good that they have that level of passion still by the end of camp. They're still fired up and still excited and about, competing and not being made to look bad in front of their teammates. So I think it's a positive thing, as long as no one's throwing real punches or getting hurt in a practice fight. I think a little skirmish is probably not a bad thing for a team that, needs to be a physical football team. And that's it for us, guys. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you check us out tomorrow when we are going to do a little bit of a preview, like I mentioned, of the game this weekend. And until tomorrow, happy trails, everybody.